Hello, this is Lessons in History with Roger Weston. Welcome to my world where history repeats itself every day. I read and analyzed over 1,000 biographies. We shine the light on great events, great disasters, great villains, and great heroes. We seize the lessons of history and peel back the layers so that we can expose some of the great strategies and lessons that we can apply to our own life to overcome adversity. I, as I mentioned, I read and analyzed over 1,000 biographies over a series of years, and I distilled it all down to a 400-page private manuscript that features 40 key strategies that have been successful over hundreds of years for thousands of people in all kinds of different fields and circumstances. And so that's why I'm doing these videos, just to talk about a few of them. Now back to history. Many people in life seem to be dealt a bad hand. And many people feel that way about their situation. They feel abandoned and cheated by life. Take Beethoven. Many people wouldn't think, well, Beethoven got a bad hand. They would think, this is the person who, had it all. And in a way, he had a lot of good fortune. But he had a very hard, miserable childhood. And an alcoholic father who was harsh with him. But in a way, that was a blessing, in the sense that he was driven by his father to become the musician that he was. His father, it's like his father wanted to have that dream for himself, but he had failed, and so he pushed Beethoven. I don't know if it was the right thing that he did. He was apparently a very harsh alcoholic and abusive, possibly, pushed his did I don't know, but nevertheless, however, Beethoven was extremely bitter about his father, and yet Beethoven was the beneficiary of who he became his whole life. And so maybe he benefited from that adversity in more than one way. But really, the great adversity that struck Beethoven was, as a young man, he was already a composer, a successful composer and musician. But then he went deaf. And this was a terrible thing for Beethoven to face as a musician. If there's one thing a musician feels that they need, it's their hearing. It's like a pianist who gets their hands crushed or something. It's not a good thing. In fact, one pianist lost their career that way. So Beethoven was so devastated. It wasn't just that he lost his hearing, but on top of that, he had this loud, blaring ringing that came inside his head, inside his ears, and even it's not like he had peaceful silence. He had this loud ringing on top of it. And so he was so devastated by this that he even considered suicide. And it was so bad that he wrote in a letter to a friend. This is what he wrote. He wrote, "I must confess that I lead a miserable life. For almost 2 years, I have ceased to attend any social functions just because I find it impossible to say to people, I am deaf. If I had any other profession, I might be able to cope with my infirmity. But in my profession, it is a terrible handicap." In a letter to his brother, which he never sent, it was found after his death, Beethoven wrote, "I would have needed little. It would have needed little for me to put an end to my life. It was only art which held me back." So Beethoven decided to live on. He was actually contemplating suicide, and then he realized he told friends, my deafness and the anger it brought on makes me want to seize fate by the throat. He didn't like his circumstances, but he realized that this was all he had. This was his fate, and he was going to make the best of it. He was going to do something with what life he had. And what followed was a string of masterpieces like the world has never seen. This is after he went deaf. He was more prolific than ever before, and he created masterpieces like nobody's ever seen before. I mean, now Beethoven is almost a symbol of music itself, and great music in particular. And that was the result of the bad hand he was dealt. That he took what he made something of it. Now we aren't all, in fact none of us are geniuses in music like Beethoven, and we all face adversity of one kind or another. And so, but we also have the opportunity to take our situation and seize fate by the throat and make the best of it and do what we can with what we've got in what time we have left. It reminds me of on YouTube, I saw a video one time, and there was there was these detectives, and they were they were bounty hunters. They were tracking down an Indian, and they caught him on the reservation. They couldn't arrest him because it was on the reservation, but it was way back in the wilderness, and he owed like $200. It was this old man, and he hadn't paid his debt, and he was on the edge of a cliff, this old man, and he was ready to jump. He told them he was about to jump, and they talked him out of it. And the reason he said he wanted to jump was because he couldn't pay back his $200, and he said, it's just caused too much grief. I just want to end it all. For $200, he was going to jump off a cliff, and the bounty hunters, who were actually his friends, they knew him. He said, "You know what? You don't want to do that. If it turns out to be the wrong decision, there's no redo on this one." And so they convinced him not to do it. So, I think that old man decided to seize fate by the throat and do what he could with what he had. Comment below. We'll see you at the next report. I'm Roger Weston.